Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Role models play an important part in all of our lives, whether we seek them out or not. And whether we walk the Buddhist path or not, they can have the power to shape the direction we take and the ability to influence the decisions that flow on from there. Life, with its ebbs and flows, challenges and opportunities, and at every turn we often seek wise counsel, examples that we can follow, and emulate people that we can respect or look up to, and much, much more. On the Buddhist path, the Buddha, for all intents and purposes, is our most eminent role model, teacher, and the Perfectly Enlightened One. There are also many noble and great disciples of the Buddha, those who have ordained as well as lay people, who were commended and praised by the Buddha for different qualities and or aspects of their practice. This will be a recurring segment on the podcast where we ask who are our role models and feature some of these great disciples of the Buddha. The aim is to learn about these noble beings and delight in their lives and accomplishments, learn from them, highlight the importance of recognizing them as noteworthy role models, and as inspiration towards the Noble Eightfold Path. Today we're looking again at non-disciples of the Buddha, and this is found in Panchama Vagga of Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 1, discourse number 241. In this case is Bhikkhuni Sona, and she was declared the foremost of the non-disciples who are energetic, or in Pali, āraddhavīriyānaṁ. This also translates as someone who arouses energy, applies active effort, and this is something that we've been looking at when we look at the Sekapatipada Sutta and looking at who is accomplished in the area of being energetic, arousing energy. So what's really interesting about Bhikkhuni Sona is she has the same attribute or the same praise given by the Buddha around this quality as Venerable Bhikkhuni Soṇā, Kolivissa, who we've also looked at. And this was something actually that I missed. I didn't see that she actually had the same thing when it came to energetic. So it's really interesting to find out this particular person's story because it's quite fascinating. She ordained late in life and she had a very full day life. So for us, I think it's quite interesting to see the background to how she came to being nominated by the Buddha for this particular quality. Similar to other noble disciples of the Buddha, Bhikkhuni Sona actually made this aspiration to become foremost at being energetic during the time of Padumuttara Buddha. So if we go to Sonatheri Apadana, which relates to Bhikkhuni Sona in her own words, she actually says, the victor Padumuttara was a master of everything. That leader arose in the world 100,000 eons hence. Born then in a millionaire's clan, I was happy, honored, held dear. Approaching the excellent sage, I heard his words, sweet as honey. I was overjoyed having heard the victor praise the nun, foremost of those who make a strong effort, doing service for the teacher. Then, worshipping the Sambuddha, I aspired to attain that place. The great hero approved of that. Your aspiration will succeed. And Padumuttara Buddha basically said that she would become foremost of the non-disciples with strong effort during the time of Gautama Buddha. Bhikkhuni Sona's background is actually quite fascinating because she ordained quite late in life, and most of her life was spent as a householder, raising children and leading the householder life. So I'll read a little from the Great Women Disciples of the Buddha, compiled by Nayana Ponikatera and Helmut Hecker. So they write, there was a housewife in Savatthi who had 10 children. She was always occupied with giving birth, with nursing and raising her children, with educating them, and with arranging marriages for them. Her whole life centered upon her children, and she was therefore known as Sona with many children. So from the suttas, it appears that she actually had 10 handsome and distinguished sons. So Sona's husband was a lay follower of the Buddha. After having scrupulously observed the precepts for several years as a householder, he decided to devote himself fully to the holy life, and so he took ordination as a monk. It was not easy for Sona to accept this decision, yet she did not waste her time with regrets and sorrow, but decided to live a more devout life herself. She called her 10 children together, turned her considerable wealth over to them, and asked them to provide her with only her bare necessities. For a while all went well with this arrangement. She had sufficient support and could spend her time in religious activities. But before long, the old woman became a burden to her children and their spouses. They had never really accepted their father's decision to enter the order, and even less did they sympathize with their mother's religious devotion. Indeed, they thought their parents to be fools for forsaking the pleasures that their wealth could purchase. In their eyes, their parents were mentally unstable religious fanatics, and thus their attitude towards their mother quickly changed from respect to contempt. They no longer gave thought to how deeply they were indebted to their mother for all their wealth and for many years of care and attention she had lavished on them. Looking only to their own convenience, they considered the old woman a nuisance and a burden. The words of the Buddha that a grateful person is as rare in the world as a saint again proved true in this case. So what we know is that the Buddha always praises those that care for parents, that even if you were to carry them on your back for many lifetimes, if not just this single lifetime, it would never repay the debt. So you can see from this example that her children are not doing very well in this regard. So we'll keep going. The disdainful treatment from her children was even more painful for Sona than separation from her husband. She became aware that waves of bitterness arose in her, that reproaches and accusations towards her children intermingled in her mind. She realized that what she had taken to be selfless love, pure mother's love, was in reality self-love, coupled with expectations of requital. She had been relying on her children completely and had been convinced that she would be supported by them in her old age as a tribute to her long years of solicitude for them. She had assumed that gratitude, appreciation, and participation in their affairs would be her reward. Hadn't she then really looked at her children as an investment, as insurance against fear and loneliness of old age? In this manner, she investigated her motives and found the truth of the Enlightened One's words in herself, that it was a woman's way not to rely on possessions, power, and abilities, but solely on her children, while it was the way of the ascetic to rely on virtue alone. So she's basically talking about, or what she's contemplating, are really acquisitions. Like we've spoken about acquisitions before in the sense of possessions and wealth and things like that, and also children and family members and our friends and family. So she's reflecting on that and realizing that she's standing on, basically as a mother, she's standing on her children. So her, like if you think about her adhitthana, her worldly resolution is on her children, her sons. And the glue that's holding that together is for her sons and their families to respect her, to do quite well, for her to be, I guess, the best in that respect. And what she's finding is that when she compares it to the ascetic or one who has taken refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, even ordained, then the adhitthana becomes the virtue. So it becomes like the vinaya that you hold. And so there's no glue holding you to the world. In actual fact, you're just standing on purity of your virtue. So that's her reflection. So it goes on to say her reflections brought her to the decision to enter the order of nuns so that she could develop the qualities of selfless love and virtue. Why should she remain in her home when she be accepted only grudgingly? She looked upon the household life as grey and oppressive, and she pictured the life of a nun as bright and beautiful. Thus, following her husband's path, she went forth into homelessness and became a nun in the Blessed One's Bhikkhuni Sangha. We learn from Bhikkhuni Sona's story that she struggled because she ordained in old age and there were various challenges. But I think what's quite inspirational about her story is how she rose up to that challenge because she did attain arahantship. So what we get to learn from this next little part is how she actually developed a sense of urgency and aroused a great deal of energy in order to realize path and fruit. So we go on to read, but after a while Sona came to realize that she had simply taken her self-love along with her into her new life. Having entered the Sangha as an old woman, she had dozens of habits and peculiarities that were obstacles in this new environment. She was used to doing things in a certain way while the other nuns did them differently, and therefore she made herself the target of criticism and correction by those much younger than herself. Sona soon discovered that it was not so easy to reach noble attainments, and that the order of nuns was not the paradise she had envisioned. Just as she had not found security with her children, so ordination as a nun did not bring immediate peace of heart. It became clear to Sona that she had to fight hard to win victory over her willfulness and credulity. She realized that it was necessary to practice mindfulness and self-observation, and to implant into her memory those teachings that could be at her disposal when needed to counteract her emotions. What use would be all her knowledge and vows if she were carried away by her emotions and if her memory failed her when it was most needed? These were her thoughts that ran through her mind, strengthening her determination to submit her self-will fully to the training. So this particular part, what's quite important is she realized the importance of knowing the Buddha's teachings, memorizing certain parts of them, so that she could call them at will when she was being challenged by conditions, when her feelings or emotions were starting to challenge her, and at the same time to be able to apply them. So rather than shake with when the feelings start to slide, when you start to experience dukkha by the challenging conditions, what she's saying is that you draw to mind things that you've retained from the teachings, that you've learned, that you've practiced, even simply the Buddha's words, that you can recall them in order to overcome what's making you shake, what's making you fall for those conditions. That's something quite key. And I think also with old age, or as we all age, it's very clear that we need to direct some attention in that direction, because the longer you leave it, the harder it is. And it doesn't matter what age you are, even when you're young and you're studying, it's still difficult to retain information. So you imagine when Sona is quite old, it must be so very difficult for her to remember things. And all of us in our own way know what that means, that it is quite challenging. So it goes on to say that Sona had entered the order in old age. She applied herself to the practice with a compelling sense of urgency. So this is like, I think in Pali, samvega. So sense of urgency. I think if you don't have the sense of urgency, it's very hard to apply yourself. You kind of think, oh, I've got plenty of time. This can wait. I don't need to prioritize that right now. But irrespective of age, I think sense of urgency is very important. So Sona would even pass entire nights in sitting and walking meditation, taking only minimal sleep. So as to avoid calling attention to herself, she practiced walking meditation during the night in the darkness of the lower hall. She guided her steps by grabbing hold of the pillars, thereby ensuring that she would not stumble or bump into unseen objects. In this way, her energy quickly gathered momentum. So another thing we can learn here is to break up our practice between sitting and walking meditation. Buddha always talks about there being many blessings of walking meditation, one of which is, of course, good health. But I think sometimes we underestimate how good it can be to do more walking meditation in terms of being able to sustain energy and also to rouse it. So Venerable Sona Bhikkhuni is really demonstrating that in her practice. And I think as lay householders, because we're not ordained monastics, we don't tend, and this is something I notice with lay household life, we don't tend to do a lot of walking meditation. But I do see from reading about the monastics and also about just doing as much as we can in our life in terms of walking meditation, it can be very good from an energy perspective, rousing energy, sustaining energy, staying wakeful, not sliding into sloth and torpor, And there's a gentle kind of flow that happens when you contemplate Dhamma as you do walking meditation. So it's something to bear in mind that we can take away from Bhikkhuni Sona's practice. So Bhikkhuni Sona, she attained arahantship. It took place without any special circumstances to herald it, on an occasion when she had been left behind in the monastery while other nuns went out. So she describes it in her own words in the verses in the Upadana. And then the other bhikkhunis left me alone in the monastery. They had given me instructions to boil a cauldron of water. Having fetched the water, I poured it into the cauldron. I put the cauldron on the stove and sat. Then my mind became composed. I saw the aggregates as impermanent, suffering and non-self, so not taking them as me and mine. Having expelled all the taints from my mind, right there I attained to arahantship. So this is quite an amazing thing. It's such a mundane thing to do, to boil water. And during that time, she actually contemplated and she realized arahantship. I mean, when you think about how we often think about noble arahants, we think that it's going to be something miraculous and something quite wonderful and wondrous in terms of the event. But when you hear Bhikkhuni Sona's story, it's actually quite heartwarming, if you could say that. Heartwarming that it's so mundane. And maybe it might be a struggle to imagine us as lay people boiling a kettle of water and then realizing arahantship. So that probably won't happen. But at the same time, you can't discount it, particularly if you're contemplating the Buddha's words in a sequential, gradual, and precise way. That you are suvacha, you're willing to be instructed by the Buddha. And clearly Bhikkhuni Sona is, with the amount of energy and sense of urgency that she had roused, that even while boiling water, she was contemplating the Buddha's words. So extremely wonderful role model. So apparently when the other nuns returned, they asked her for the hot water, which she still hadn't fully boiled. So using her supernormal power of the fire element, Sona quickly heated the water and offered it to the nuns. So that's quite a miracle, being able to do that, and probably really startled the other nuns. When it was reported to the Buddha that she had attained arahantship, he was rejoicing and he uttered this verse: better than living 100 years indolent and lacking in energy is living one day with firm effort. And I think that's where the Buddha's praise really comes from, that there were a number of challenges for Bhikkhuni Sona, and she really rose up to those challenges, particularly with her old age and particularly with certain conditions and challenges that she herself had. And so she demonstrated through her persistence, her sense of urgency and rousing of energy, a very good example to the rest of us. And it's such a contrast to, say, for example, Venerable Sona Kolavissa, that this particular bhikkhu that we've already learned about, he had a different set of challenges where he was overbalancing in terms of working really, really hard towards the path. And the Buddha's teaching to him was the simile of the lute, where he had to actually balance out how much energy he was giving, because he was giving way too much. So, and not realizing the result, even with rousing too much energy. So you get this contrast between both Venerable Sona Kolavissa and then Bhikkhuni Sona in this case. Now, the Buddha has also uttered this verse when it comes to another monk, and this was a monk that has a story from the Dhammapada verse, and he basically tried to kill himself because he wasn't happy with the life of the bhikkhu, that he felt humiliated and he wanted to return to householder life because he wasn't making progress on the path. And the funny thing was with this story was that despite him making a number of attempts to kill himself, one was with putting his hand into a place where there was a snake and the snake didn't bite him, and then he tried to use a razor to kill himself. But the interesting thing about the story was that even though he placed a razor at his throat, at that time he reflected on the purity of his virtue. And then he realized rapture from just that contemplation. And then when he was in that rapturous mental state, he was able to contemplate the Dhamma. And so when he returned to the monastery, the Buddha actually recited the same verse that we've just read out about living 100 years, being slack and being lazy with no energy, versus one day with really firm effort, with strength and fortitude of rousing energy. And what the Buddha was saying this in regard to for this venerable, and his name was Thera Sappadasa, was that the bhikkhus had asked, is it possible to attain arahantship in such a short time? And the Buddha said yes. And that's where also this particular gatha, this verse from the Buddha actually also comes from. So finally, I'd just like to read some words from Bhikkhuni Sona, and this is in the Therigatha, and just a few verses, just in her own words. 10 children I bore from this physical heap, then weak from that, aged, I went to a nun. She taught me the Dhamma, aggregates, sense spheres, and elements. Hearing her Dhamma, I cut off my hair and ordained, having purified the divine eye while still a probationer. I know my previous lives where I lived in the past. I developed the themeless meditation, well-focused oneness. I gained the liberation of immediacy from lack of clinging, unbound. The 5 aggregates comprehended, stand like a tree with its root out through. I spit on old age, there is now no further becoming. So clearly she had a number of attainments. She also had a number of knowledges, and very much she saw through the 5 aggregates. So this is some inspiration for us when it comes to whatever challenges we have, if they are similar to Bhikkhuni Sona, or if we can resonate with some of her story and learn from it and infuse that into our practice. I think that's very useful. We can end the session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem, wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.